Okay, so this is my book video review number 5, and I'm doing it on Into the Wild by John Krauker. So, for the first question, I chose, I didn't choose it, but it's the question, what is this book about? And so I said, this book tells the story of Christopher McCandless. I think that's how you say it. When I was reading it, I always read it as McCandles, but then I rewrote the spelling a few times. I was like, I'm very sure it's not candles. So Miss Christopher McCandless, a recent college graduate who decides to leave society behind. And then after graduating, he donates his savings to charity and abandons most of his possessions and begins traveling across the country under the name Alexander. So he always grew up pretty rich, and he was very fortunate when he was growing up, but he donated all of that to start traveling. So along the way, he meets many people who are inspired by his independence and his determination. And the story is told through many different people, through interviews, and the reader follows many different reports from people who had interacted with Chris throughout his whole journey. So eventually, Chris travels to the wilderness of Alaska, hoping to live completely off the grid. He stays in an abandoned bus deep in the wild and tries to survive by hunting and gathering food, however, he becomes trapped by the harsh environment and his lack of supplies. And then after several months alone, he dies in the wilderness. Okay, so the first question that I chose was, what do you like about the book? And I said, I like the mystery aspect of the book because the author slowly reveals pieces of Christopher McCandless's story as the book goes on. Instead of telling everything at once, the reader learns about his travels and the reasons behind his choices throughout different people that he met, and then also the evidence that he left behind. So this makes the story more interesting, and it keeps the reader curious and constantly wondering about what actually happened to him and why he chose to live the way that he did. And then at the beginning of the book, we don't really know anything about McCandless except for that he was a young traveler who was found dead. And then since we don't really know anything about McCandless, the people also didn't know anything about Christopher McCandless because they all knew him as Alex. So on page 14, we can see this when McCandless's body is found. And Krauker writes, McCandless's signature had been penned at the bottom of the SOS note, and the photos, when developed, included many self-portraits, but because he had been carrying no identification, the authorities didn't know who he was, where he was from, or why he was there. So nobody knew him as Chris McCandless, so if they were asking people if they knew who he was, they would have to show a photo because everyone knew him as Alex. And then this mysterious start to the book really sets up the whole mystery aspect, and it makes it fun and interesting to read and discover more about who Chris McCandless really was. Okay, so then the second question I chose was, what was a particularly strong move made by the author? And I said, a strong move made by the author is using interviews and stories from the people Christopher McCandless met during his travels to slowly reveal who he was. Instead of explaining everything about him right away, Krauker lets readers learn about him through the memories of others. And then this makes the story feel more mysterious and realistic because readers can piece together McCandless's personality and his motivations the same way that investigators and friends did after his death. And then a quote that showcases this is someone else telling Chris's story for him on page 120 during an interview with Eric Hathaway, one of his old friends from high school. And he says it was obvious he had changed. He seemed very introverted, almost cold. And this differs from what the other interviews conducted from people who had met him after he started traveling said, with a woman named Jan Burrs. And she met him early on in his journey, and she said he was a really good kid on page 30. And then this leads the reader to wonder if the traveling was what helped him kind of get his spark back, or if it was his need for independence that helped him. So then, what does the book teach me? This is my last one that I chose. So I said one thing that this book teaches me is that even though independence and adventure can be super exciting, people still need relationships and connections with others to be truly happy. And Christopher McCandless wanted to escape society and prove that he could survive completely on his own in the wilderness. Throughout his journey, he avoided staying in one place and often left people who cared about him because he valued his total freedom. However, by the end of his time alone in Alaska, he begins to slowly realize that life is more meaningful when experiences are shared with others. A quote that shows this is when all of Mick Candless's notes are recovered from the abandoned bus in Alaska, where he writes, in all capitals, "Happiness only real when shared." And this moment is important because it shows after spending months alone, Mick Candless starts to understand that isolation is not what truly brings fulfillment, and that it makes the reader reflect on the importance of relationships, family, and community in their own lives. So this specifically teaches me that yes, independence is necessary, because I feel like I would kind of say that I'm a very independent person myself. So I could kind of relate to Mick Candless a little bit when reading, because I really can see myself in him, in his need for independence. So even though that independence is necessary to find your full potential and really explore yourself, it's not enough on its own, and that people just need connection, support, and relationships to truly be happy and fulfilled. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to my book report.